Welcome back. I'd like to introduce Dr. Michael Barnish, who is the head of genetics and life science for Revive Global. He's going to be joining us from the UK.
Hello from Manchester over in the UK. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect, great to know. Thank you for letting me join today. As you introduced me, I'm Dr. Michael Barnish, the head of life science for Revive. As you can see, I'm at Revive HQ today, all the way over in the UK. I'm a medically trained doctor with experience in the public and private healthcare sectors. And I have used elective IV therapy as part of my preventative health practice here in the UK for the best part of a decade. During that time, I have trained and supported Revive's extensive global network of medical directors in all corners of the world on IV therapy and nutrigenetic testing. It's been a real privilege of my career, actually, and getting to meet and be exposed to that global network of medical professionals is fantastic. A large focus of my time at Revive and within the industry has been in innovation, research and development, building algorithms for bringing precision to IV therapy and other nutritional interventions as well, in order to preserve, maintain and restore health. So I'm highly passionate about changing the way we deliver healthcare to patients all around the world. I do want to see a shift that brings about a proactive and a preventative method to a largely reactive healthcare system. We want the reactive, of course, in the case of emergency, etc., but it should not be the focus of our health systems around the world. So thank you for having me today. It's an absolute pleasure to be part of this amazing conference and its discussions and join in this global panel of experts to really explore the key themes and ideas for the IV therapy industry. So let's begin. The world has a serious problem. Despite our advancing technologies, extensive healthcare research and funding, serious illness and disease is affecting more and more of us year on year, and you can see there on the screen, hopefully, some of the stats from some of the leading entities monitoring this around the world. This serious illness and disease affliction is reducing quality of life for many people around the world. We've heard that already today, as well as increasing the economic and social burden of poor health on our societies. I do believe we live in the most challenging time for a human being. Fair enough, we don't have to avoid saber-toothed tigers whilst foraging for our food anymore, but we have a new group of problems to deal with. Our evolution hasn't kept up with the drastic generational changes that happen constantly now in our environment. Just to name a few, we're exposed to thousands of chemicals and pollutants, more than ever before. Our lives are fuller and busier with social demands, work demands, professional demands that aren't in keeping with our biology. This is leading to chronic states of physiological stress and affecting our health massively. We have an incredible access to food, too incredible actually. So the chance of overnutrition is a global problem. And the food is often, industrially farmed for quantity rather than quality. It's increasingly processed, offering low nutritional and high calorie options more and more. And that's leading to increases in nutritional deficiencies despite the abundance of food. And what's that leaving us with? It's leaving us with cancer, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, just to name some of the big global killers or the big diseases that are affecting us or due to affect us more and more in the future. And, the coming decades aren't looking great despite the levels of research and funding we have in the areas. The WHO came out recently, actually, with the most common cause of malnutrition around the world now is is overnutrition, and that's very correlated with the global obesity pandemic. Something's got to change. We must change something, and I believe that's why I'm here today, that one of the most effective ways to tackle these rising health concerns is by focusing on prevention, thinking about personalized approaches for an individual, and ensuring that nutritional biochemistry is part of the plan. We are the food we eat at the end of the day. Elective IV therapy allows us to act fast, actually, and deliver these nutrients with increased bioavailability. We can use other substances, medicines, of course, as well in this method, but it's also, we can correct a person's deficiency fast and systemically as well, not just targeting local areas of the body. You know, with our modern environment disrupting our health like never before, causing increased nutritional demands or deficiencies, you know, it really is a problem. So many doctors like myself all over the world are utilizing intravenous and injectable nutrition as an effective way to restore or maintain or preserve someone's optimal health. Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. Preventative medicine is often overlooked because the world has a strict evidence-based approach to medicine. And of course, this isn't a bad thing. We want to know that what we do for our patients is effective and safe. And it has led to some incredible advances in medicine over the last century, and we have treatments for many, many different problems. However, it does mean that our current healthcare model, this evidence-based approach, largely ignores areas that are hard to gain controlled experiment data in, and that's areas such as prevention, precision, nutrition, whether it's delivered orally or injectably, such as IV therapy, but also interventions looking at increasing health span or lifespan as well. You know, these experiments are hard to do in this area. They're going to be long. They're going to cost an absurd amount if we want to really limit the confounding factors to prove that cause and effect in those specific fields. You know, our results will be available only after decades of time from when the hypothesis was generated. The controlled nature of doing experiments to limit those confounded factors may actually have ethical reasons. You can't lock two groups of people in rooms or hospital wards and you know, give the same intervention to see if something was preventable. And so, you know, it really is a tricky area to gain that evidence-based flag of approval. Therefore, you know, a lot of the desired experiments in the areas that we're practicing in IV therapy and nutrition, you know, they're impractical and quite hard to do to get that staunch cause and effect data. And that's why we must look really at adopting an evidence-informed approach to these key areas of health, IV therapy being one of them, nutrition, etc. In order to turn the tide of disease and poor health, we need to act now. What do I mean by evidence-informed approach? Well, ultimately, it's collecting all existing evidence. For IV therapy, that means all of the existing controlled experiments that do exist, because there are some. The epidemiology, which is vast amounts of the case series, the reports, as well as the science of nutritional biochemistry, what the nutrients do within the body, the pathophysiology, which is the disease processes, and the pharmacodynamics, where the nutrients go, how they're metabolized by the body and excreted. We put all that evidence into one big bucket and draw sensible conclusions from it. You know, as medically trained experts with clinical experience, we're able to do that and have the conversations with our patients and be able to act right now. When we add that to our, you know, collective decades of clinical experience at this event with elective IV therapy, as well as vast amounts of safety data, we can still be scientific in our approach, but bring a more proactive methodology to healthcare and to our patients right now. And that's what this is about. We're trying to improve health outcomes. We've got it against us. We need to fight these diseases. We want the prevalence figures to go down and not up over the next few decades. And IV therapy will have a part to play in that. There are thousands of peer-reviewed published scientific papers on the effects of nutritional therapies on diseases, symptoms, and deficiencies. There's thousands out there. They're available to everyone. And it's these papers that determine our practice within our industry. It's what we've built our expertise on. It's how we make our judgments of protocols for our patients with injectable nutritional therapy. So on the screen, you'll see some of the papers out there to give a very small flavor of what's being looked at, the questions that are being posed. I didn't want to build 5,000 slides for you with lots of papers there, but it just gives you that small flavor. There's a mix of controlled experiments, some reviews, some epidemiological studies there. The paper that states nutrient therapy for the improvement of fatigue symptoms is a paper that myself and my team published last year. So, our medical professionals in the industry are actively trying to contribute to the science out there as well. That paper specifically looks at the oral and injectable nutritional interventions for fatigue in different groups of individuals, looking at all the science pulled together. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. Brilliant. Elective IV therapy isn't adopted by mainstream evidence-based medicine just yet, but it is today evidence-informed. And our outcome data that's been mentioned previously by some of the previous speakers, is being created across the world, and it's firming up that bucket of evidence that we do have. This is continuously refining the protocols for IV therapy, and it's resulting in effective outcomes for our patients. I'm seeing it firsthand. Excuse me. The growth of the IV therapy industry has led to that increase in outcome data. We have more than ever before. It's vital evidence that help us pose the correct research questions. And as the industry grows, we'll have more and more of this outcome data. So we can pose the correct research questions for the future to further firm up evidence that of efficacy for IV therapy and effectiveness for the intervention. And together, this industry-wide effort will take our science further than ever before, and that's extremely exciting. Can we please have the next slide? Oh, I think we're already on the next slide, actually. So halt there. Let me just check. Yeah, perfect. So we're drawing on increased bioavailability. So when we're giving nutrients via IV therapy, it's improving people's health drastically, and we're doing it faster than other interventions. In my practice here in the UK, there's some imagery on the screen there that highlights some of the results. But I've seen a reversal of diseases such as rosacea and acne, pre-diabetes, hyperlipidemia, eczema. This is in patients that have been sort of going to traditional medical services, conventional medical services for years without any positive outcomes in their disease process. And, they find themselves to doctors like myself that utilize an evidence-informed approach and find a solution that does work for them. It does work, and so people are seeking it more and more. I've seen the reversal of deficiencies, nutritional deficiencies, often just after a single treatment, as you can imagine. Improved symptoms in conditions such as Parkinson's disease, chronic fatigue syndrome, drastic falls in blood sugar control, and the HbA1c in diabetics, so as drastic as 10 millimoles per mole in just 6 weeks. That's taken someone from uncontrolled diabetes to almost the pre-diabetic range. And I've seen the return of neurological functioning following a stroke, stroke events, and people that had lost the ability to utilize their multiple languages. I've seen that return, and all this is utilizing injectable nutritional therapies, thinking about it sensibly and taking that evidence-informed approach, making sure we're having those conversations with our patients so they're fully aware. And I'm not alone. We've already heard some stories today, but the other experts on this panel will have their own incredible stories to share, not just one or two, but lots. And it's really exciting. We have a medical intervention that's really drawing on nutritional biochemistry. It's working at preserving and maintaining people's health fast and effectively across a broad spectrum of poor health issues, not just one specific disease like many medications. Can I have the next slide, please? So bringing a scientific approach to the industry is leading to a very new movement, that move in IV therapy, and that movement is precision nutrition. Some buzzwords there, exciting. Changes in our culture is creating a demand really for precision in every industry sector. Healthcare, and more specifically relevant to our industry, the IV therapy, nutritional health is no exception. We are seeing that demand all around the world and growing fast. Sometimes the science is ahead of the customer and patient, but sometimes their demands drive the science as well. And with the precision nutrition movement, there really is a mix of both drivers here, which is really interesting and has led to the birth of the precision nutrition industry. Precision is a term that implies accuracy, and it describes, for me, deep personalization, using lots of different biological and subjective data to come to form plans around nutrition that are appropriate for an individual. It's enabled really with increasingly lower costs and increasing access to testing biomarkers of health, such as genetic testing, blood testing at home, point of care testing kits. And if we pair that with the growing scientific discovery within the precision nutrition field and the genetic fields, we really have the formulation for a multi-billion-dollar industry, and we'll see that precision nutrition is a multi-billion-dollar industry within the decades, which is really interesting. Of course, IV therapy is injectable nutrition, and is a big part of that. Tracking biomarkers is also going to become easier with more continuous insight. So if we think about our continuous blood glucose monitors that people are wearing, wearables are getting better and better, and it'll be amazing to see where these go in the next few years. Being able to access many different nutritionally relevant biomarkers in real time for a person is going to change the game, and precision is going to be ever more important and utilized within our practice, which is really exciting. We do have enough good quality scientific evidence today, and couple that with our expertise in the industry, we can bring, and we are bringing, precision nutrition to life within IV therapy. The outcome data from this is already showing excellent results for our patients, and as that industry, that sector of our industry grows, that evidence base will continue to grow exponentially. Imagine having the correct nutritional intervention for a person delivered in the correct method, whether that's IV, etc., that's focused on a person's current health, their genetics, their other biomarkers, but also aligned with their health goal to relieve an illness, remove a symptom, or to preserve health. It is a really exciting area of our industry, and one that I wanted to discuss today. Growth in precision nutrition and precision IV therapy specifically, will result in very detailed outcome data sets. We match this with the advances in machine learning and artificial intelligence, and we're going to get some very interesting associations and patterns that can be learned at speed that really help build that evidence-informed bucket of scientific evidence and help us refine the precision nutrition for a person even further. And that evidence spills out into other areas, preventative and longevity medicine as well. So we're really on the verge of something really exciting within our industry. I do believe that IV therapy can, be one of the first fields in healthcare to adopt a precision approach as its standard, actually. And I'm incredibly excited and privileged to be part of that movement and, working with incredible scientific minds to bring that to life for IV therapy specifically. It's begun, which is really exciting. So I'll probably leave you now with that nice idea, that lovely idea that we're in an industry that is pioneering, that is improving patient outcomes, that's can be deeply personalized, precise to them. A world in which we can begin to be sensible and proactive in our war on disease. IV therapy will fast become an important modality utilized as a standard approach by medical professionals around the world with the growth of our outcome data and therefore evidence. And this is going to lead to healthier lives, which at the end of the day means that we have happier lives full of nicer and more joyful experiences. And for me, happier people means we live in a happier planet, and that is everything. So it's a nice thing to end on, and I really thank you for listening to me today from all the way over in the UK. So thank you, and I'm looking forward to the next set of speakers.
All right, it's my pleasure to introduce Dan Powell from Olympia Pharmacy, who's going to talk about pharmacy from a national perspective and the difference between 503A and B.
Good morning, everybody. I've lived in Florida now for 30 years. I moved to Orlando in 1994. I moved here from Pennsylvania. And one of the things you notice when you move from a northern state to a southern state like Florida, besides the obvious, the change in the weather, you don't have to shovel snow in Florida very often. I've been here 30 years and never had to pick up a snow shovel. Very happy about that. But one of the things that's kind of odd when you move down here is Florida doesn't have basements. They have very few basements. Up in Pennsylvania, where we grew up, we always had basements. And those basements could have taken on several different forms. Some people use them as entertainment rooms. They put heat down there, couches, carpeting, fireplace, a great little place. But in our house, it was a workshop. So it was my dad's workshop. My dad was very handy, could take apart a motorcycle engine, put it back together. We had a coal furnace, and I helped him when that would break down. I'd help him get that back together. Woodworking, electricity, anything he could do, anything that took skill with your hands and craftsmanship, he could do. Unfortunately, a lot of that skill was lost on me. I can't do a whole lot of that stuff. But one thing that I learned spending that time down in the basement with my dad was having the right tool for the right job was very important. Fast forward to about 2 years ago, and I have an old Jeep Wrangler that has the crank down windows, right? And the door handle broke on the outside. You couldn't open it anymore from the outside. So I thought, you know what, I could probably tackle this myself. It can't be that hard. So one of the things you had to do was take that crank off of the inside of the door to get the door apart. So I got my pliers and my flathead screwdriver, and I was working that thing probably for an hour and a half. Could not get it apart. So I went to the Google mechanic and I Googled how to get this off. And I found out for $6.95, there was a part I could order on Amazon and I could have it the next morning. And I got that part and I walked out to my Jeep. It was a flat piece of metal and I went pop and the door handle came right off. And in the back of my mind, I'm going, Dad, right tool, right tool for the right job. And I also learned in that basement in Pennsylvania, a lot of other life lessons, like my first swear words, the maximum velocity of a socket wrench. so some cool things like that. But the right tool for the right job was probably the most important thing. So for those of you who are in the IV industry, having the right pharmacy to fulfill your business with the right types of medications and safe medications is like having the right tool for the right job. In the pharmacy world, there's 503As and 503B pharmacies. So picking the right pharmacy is going to be very important to get the safest medication. In 2014-ish, President Obama signed into effect the DQSA, which is the Drug Quality and Security Act. That's when pharmacies split. That's when they became up the 503As and 503Bs. Prior to that, there was just sterile compounders and non-sterile compounders. So at that time, just to give you kind of a gauge on how significant that was for our industry, there was about 8,000 sterile compounders in the country at that time. Once the DQSA went into effect and the FDA stepped in and said, hey, we're going to make 503As and 503Bs, the 503Bs, there's about 80 of us right now. So out of the 8 or 10,000 sterile compounders back then, only 80 have been able to rise to the level of the 503B. So what does that mean? What's the difference between a 503A and a 503B? Well, sometimes I feel like an interpreter with this stuff because this comes from our quality department, and they have books and SOPs and 3-ring binders. So what I try and do when I speak to people is kind of give a high-level overview, not get too much into the weeds. So if you'll join me on this journey through our quality assurance department, we'll walk through this together. So 503 pharmacies are under the federal and state regulations, not only 797, which has been a big point of discussion for the last 6 or 8 months, right? 797, 795, and 800 all apply. So 797 applies to sterile compounding, 795 to non-sterile compounding, and 800 is hazardous drugs. And when I say hazardous, things like hormones, progesterone, estrogen, testosterone. So we're under all those guidelines, but we also operate under the 503Bs, also operate under CGMP, current good manufacturing processes. Those are the same guidelines that places like Eli Lilly and Pfizer operate under. And that's what sets the 503Bs apart. And we'll get into that in more detail here in the next couple points. So at Olympia, we're licensed in 47 states. So we must follow 797, 795, 800, and CGMP, whereas 503A pharmacies only have to follow the state. So they're under 795, 797, and 800. We do all those things, but also CGMP. Now, 503B pharmacies are subject to CGMP FDA inspections. 503A pharmacies are subject to only the State Board of Pharmacy inspections. And FDA will step into a 503A pharmacy sometimes if there's insanitary conditions, but not on a regular basis. All products at the 503B must be validated. Now, this part is very, very interesting. So I lived through that change when the FDA stepped in, the 503 and 503B. That was in 2014. And I can tell you how we were operating. I've been with Olympia since 2010. So the way we operated from 2010 to 2014 and then 2014 to today, guys, I can tell you it's night and day. It is a complete, it's a brand new game. It's a brand new world for us. I remember when we first got into CGMP, we were reading through the guidelines and we're like, what are they talking about? Like, what is that? Like, we didn't even know what that meant. We're like, it was like learning a whole new language for us. So what we did is when we actually got caught at the time with what felt like a very bad situation, but it turned out to be a very good situation. So when that new law went into effect, the FDA decided to pick 32 or 33 pharmacies out of the 8 or 10,000 that were operating, and they decided to go out and do a litmus test of the industry and inspect those 30 pharmacies. And guess who was one of those 30 pharmacies? So 30 out of 8,000, you think, oh, we're probably going to be pretty safe. And then one day, hi, we're the FDA. We're here to inspect you. Oh my gosh, right? So it was crazy. I remember sitting at our first FDA inspection, and the lady, a very, very nice lady. I think her name was Joanne. She was a marathon runner. So, you know, those marathon runners, a little crazy anyway. But I remember sitting there and we were looking through our books and they were hammering us on a bunch of stuff because the DQSA hadn't even been put into place. It hadn't been passed yet. So this is in 2013. And they're going, well, we're showing them the book, like 797 says this and 795 says that. And we're following these rules. And I remember she took that book and she slammed it shut and she slid it down the table. And she said, guys, we're the FDA. We don't give a damn about 797. We go by CGMP and we will shut you down. Exactly, very quiet, just like it just got real quiet here. And we were like, oh my gosh. So we're sitting there and, you know, we are just like, what are we going to do? But at that point, we had to make a decision. Were we going to continue to be a 503B or we were going to go the 503A route? We weren't sure. We powwowed for a couple of weeks and we decided to, hey, we're going to go for it. We're going to be a 503B. So here we are today, 10 years later. But some of the things, the differences between the A's and the B's, from my point of view, now I work in the business development side. I'm sure there's a much different perspective from the guys and girls in the lab. But from my point of view, everything that we use in the compounding process has to be validated. So our tubing, our filters, our auger plates, where we store our drugs, where we store finished drugs, the vials, the stoppers, the caps, the labels, everything that you could think of on that drug, we have to have a supplier that's approved by the FDA. And in a lot of cases, especially when it comes to the API, which is the raw ingredients that we use to compound drugs, we have to get those from FDA approved manufacturers and wholesalers. And then on top of that, when we receive the drug, we also have to send it off for testing. So the FDA likes to do everything in threes. So you test it at the manufacturer level, you test it at the wholesaler level, and you test it at the pharmacy level. So that three redundancy is very important to the FDA because they figure if something does go wrong or something, if we're trying to stop something from going wrong, three different checks and balances should give us a good way to not have things go wrong. So we've got just a whole bunch of hoops to jump through that we never had to do as a 503A pharmacy. And please understand me when I'm not up here bashing 503A pharmacies. I'm not saying like, hey, they're horrible, don't buy from them, they're not safe. That's not it at all. And that'll become a little more clear after the next slide. So I don't want to, please don't go, God, that guy from Olympia, he hates 503As. Well, I don't. We have a 503A as well. So we have an A and a B, and we're ready to open another B probably near the end of this year. Okay, push the green button. There we go. Okay, so some other differences between the 503As and 503Bs. 503Bs have a lot more product release requirements. So we call them batch testing, batch release processes. So the FDA expects 503Bs to test for potency of the drugs, sterility of the drug, endotoxins, pH, appearance, particulate matter, bioburden, and preservative content. So what does that mean? For us, when we make a batch of medication, so we might make a typical batch for Olympia might be 5,000 vials of medication. So we take that 5,000 vials of medication, they're produced in the lab, then they go upstairs at our facility and they get locked into a cage. And the reason they're locked into a cage is because they are in quarantine and we can't sell those until we get testing back. Now, testing is done by a third-party independent company. And when I say third-party independent company, just think very expensive because that's what it is. So we have to have this company. We send a certain number of vials out of each batch to our testing company, and it takes about 2 weeks. I think the longest one is the sterility because they do stuff to the vial, see if anything's going to grow in it. So that takes about 2 weeks. So that drug is locked up in the cage for 2 weeks, and we don't sell it until we get back from the testing lab. Like, here's the green light. Now, the thing about some of you, a lot of you are customers of Olympia. Think about our lipomino product, which has about 9 active ingredients in it. When you're a 503B pharmacy and you send that off for testing, if one of those ingredients, like if we make 5,000 vials, which we often do, sometimes 10,000 vials at a time, if one ingredient comes back out of spec, we have to trash the whole batch. So do you think it's in our best interest to make sure we're doing things right from a financial aspect? who wants to throw away 10,000 vials and all the hours and time that goes into that? But that's one of the things that 503Bs have to do that 503As also do, but at a lower level. So 503A only need to test for sterility and endotoxins if they're a class 3 high risk and have extended BUD. So what does that mean if they're high risk? So when we talk about compounding, the mechanics of compounding, anytime you take a non-sterile raw ingredient, like a non-sterile powder, and you put that through the entire process and you come out with a finished sterile product, that process going from a non-sterile powder to a sterile finished product, they call that high risk compounding. Now there's medium risk and there's low risk where you're taking sterile medication from one container, putting it into another FDA toxin containers, you guys, vials, same thing. So there's low and medium risk where you're taking from one sterile vial into another sterile vial, but we're taking a powder that's non-sterile, going through a whole process and coming out with a sterile drug on the end. So that's high risk compounding. And most of the people, most of the 503As and Bs that I interact with, we all engage in high risk compounding. Like we all get our API, just kilos and kilos of drums and powders that come into the pharmacy, and we turn those into sterile drugs. So the clean room environmental monitoring for 503Bs is also stricter, requiring testing and sampling during production and non-production time. So in our clean rooms, we've got, gosh, I think 8 or 9 clean rooms now at one location and 3 or 4 at the other. So what happens is we have electronic monitoring. So there's monitors for temperature, room humidity, room pressure, and those are going 24/7. And some of our quality guys, some of the leaders in the department, on their cell phones, they have they're connected to the hive, if you will. And if anything falls out of spec, they immediately get a text message. And when they come back into the pharmacy, and this is 24/7. This isn't just during operating times. So if they come in the morning and they have a text message that says, hey, your room went out of spec. If it went out of spec for, I think it's maybe 30 minutes or longer, you've got to shut that room down. You can't compound it in it the next day. You've got to shut it down. You've got to do a clean. Then you have to write a deviation report, which basically says, hey, why did the room go down? What did we do to fix it? And then when the FDA comes in or the state comes in to inspect, we have to produce all that documentation on what we did. So that's something that's also very strict. Now, let me see, supplier qualifications. This is a lot of fun. So supplier qualifications, the 503As have to buy from an FDA approved supplier. So that and when I say supplier, I mostly mean manufacturer. So that manufacturer could be anywhere in the world. And as long as they are approved, the FDA has a list, FDA list of the manufacturers and their FDA registration number. As long as they're buying from that list as a 503A, that's their level of due diligence. For us, we have to buy from that same place. We also have to buy from a wholesaler that is registered with the FDA, and all the raw materials and efficacy, like we have to test all that stuff before we can even start compounding with that. Now, batch sizes, this is a big thing. So I'm gonna spend a couple minutes on batch sizes. When we make large batches of medication, so just to understand from our standpoint, if we make a batch of medication, let's say 10,000 vials, we have to send off a certain percentage of those vials go off to the testing company. And the testing company will test that and send the results back. Now, when that happens, when we do that testing and we get the results back, and I apologize, I totally lost my train of thought right there. Let's see, 503As, 503s. Yeah, so when we get those back, we can now sell that product. 503As, with the batch sizes, they can only make, so while we can make 5 or 10,000 vials at a time, they can only make 250. And the 250, so and that changed late last year. So for the 503As, they have been mitigated to the number of vials they can make. So if somebody's buying from a 503A and they're using it for office use administration, you're doing it wrong. And I'll explain why in just a second. So why are all these differences? Supplier qualifications, room testing, testing of each and every item through the compounding process, why is there such a big difference between A's and B's? Think of it this way. 503As, and this is a very, very broad way of looking at it, but also very important. 503As are pharmacies that make medication for patient prescriptions. 503Bs are pharmacies who make medication for office use administration. So what does that mean as far as risk? Well, if I'm making a medication for a patient at a 503A, it's a one-to-one relationship. Okay, so if something happens, if there's something wrong with that vial of medication, the potency's off or it's not sterile, the risk is one patient. And not to say one person is not important, because every single person is important. But looking at it from a standpoint of regulatory, one vial of medication to one patient, you've got a one patient risk. On the office use medications, you're using one vial, let's say a B12 injection or a B12 IV, and you're drawing up a certain amount of that multi-dose vial and using that on multiple patients. Well, now you have a scenario of a one-to-many relationship. So one-to-one on the patient side, but one-to-many on the 503B side. So that's why it's so important. And that's why I believe these rules are so much more stringent for the 503Bs. It's because there's a lot more risk involved, a lot more patient safety involved. Does that make sense to everybody? So it's very important to understand, like, why did they come up with these two types of pharmacies, and what was their kind of thinking behind that? And it's really that relationship on patient safety. And the whole reason this started, the 503As and 503Bs, if you guys remember back in, I think it's 2011 or 2012, up in Boston, Massachusetts, was the New England Compounding Center. That was the driving force behind these changes. New England Compounding Center though we didn't have A's and B's at the time, but they were a state pharmacy in Massachusetts, but they were acting as a manufacturer. So they were making large batches of a drug called methylprednisolone. And methylprednisolone, they were using it preservative-free, and they were using it intrathecally, which means they were injecting it into the spine. And what ended up happening is they had a tainted batch of medication, 60 or 70 people died, and hundreds of other people got sick. And that unfortunate and horrible situation was the driving force between the FDA stepping in and saying, hey, we've got to go and we've got to do something. And what they did was they came up between the A's and the B's, and they said, hey, since you're going to be supplying medication that's going to be touching many, many people, we want you to operate at this CGMP level. And that's why the sterile compounders shrunk, or the B shrunk from 8,000 to about 80 or 90 of our current 503B list. So when we talk through these things, I'll check my time. Okay. As we talk through these things, what does that mean from you see all the rules, all the differences between A's and B's. What does that mean to you as a business owner? Like, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not slamming 503A pharmacies, but if you're buying medication and you're using that from a 503A and you're using that medication for several people, you are walking on a regulatory nightmare. You're waiting for a regulatory time bomb to go off. So please don't do that. And I'm not just saying that because Olympia is a 503B. What I'm telling you to do is, if you are doing that with a 503A, please find a 503B to work with. And if it's not Olympia, that's okay. I'm not mad at you. We don't, we're not going to, we'll still send you a Christmas card and everything. But please, for your safety and for the patient's safety, use a 503B. And what does that mean for you, your business, and your patients? I think the number one thing, is anybody here a country music fan? We got a couple people. All right. So there's a song by the Zac Brown Band called Chicken Fried. You guys know that one? So it's second verse, third line, goes something like, let me think how that goes. So there's no dollar sign on a piece of mind, and this I've grown to know. And the last part of that, this I've grown to know, I think everybody in this room has maybe done things, maybe not in business, but it could be business, it could be personal, where you did something, you're like, man, that's probably, I probably should have handled that different, or God, I might get in trouble for that, especially when you were a kid, right? You did something like, I hope mom and dad don't find out or I'm in trouble, right? So, but and it's not too bad that like when you're a kid, you think it's the end of the world. Like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna get grounded. But that's nothing. As you get older and you do stuff that might put patients or friends or family in harm's way, that's when you lose that peace of mind. And there's nothing worse than going to bed at night and laying down on that pillow and not being able to sleep because you're worried about something you did or you didn't do. So I urge everybody here to understand the differences between 503As, 503Bs, why they do, what the differences are, and why you should always use a 503B to supply your office use medications. And I think this group of people who I get to work with, here at AIVA and other institutions that are together in this IV industry, some of the faces I see here, I see over and over and over again. I see you guys on webinars, I see you guys in different cities. And the one thing that says to me very loudly and very clearly is this industry needs representation. And all the people that I see over and over and over again, that tells me one thing, that you care. You care about your patients, you care about your business, you care about your families. And one of the leadership guys I follow, Simon Sinek, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with him, but one of the sayings he has, when people come together that believe the same thing, remarkable things can happen. And when I look at this group of people here and all the companies that we've worked with and all the people I've worked with, and I'm going to tell a little story about Felicia. I remember when Felicia first got started, and she's from Nebraska. And for the longest time, Olympia wasn't licensed in Nebraska because we thought Nebraska, who lives in Nebraska? Like, there's nobody there. But Felicia called, and I said, hey, we're working on our Nebraska license, I promise you. And this girl called me like every 30 days. Did you get your license yet? Did you get your license? And we used to joke about it. She's like, I'm probably driving you crazy. And I was like, no, not at all. But finally we got licensed in Nebraska, and I got the call and say, Felicia, guess what? We're licensed in Nebraska. And to see her and the level that her company has risen to in a relatively short amount of time, and just remembering her from, I want to open an IV place, I want to use Olympia, to see where she's gone to, I think, and everybody at Olympia knows her story because I tell it all the time. And we're just so proud of her and people like her in this industry that come to these events. You pour yourself into other people, you pour yourself into your peers, and you're here because you care. And I'm excited. I know there's some things going on that there's some challenges we all have to face, but I'm excited for the future of this industry because of people like you, people that care, people that are putting their best foot forward, people like Sam who's saying, hey, I like what he said. If something goes down, I'm fighting. Like, gloves are off. Let's go, because he believes, and I believe what we do in this industry and what we do for people in general, it makes a difference. And when you're in your 20s and your 30s, you may not realize it as much, but when you start to get, when you look in the rearview mirror and you have more road behind you than you do in front of you, things start to come into focus, like how you want to live. We're all born with the same fatal disease called aging, right? There's nothing we can do, there's nothing we can do to stop it, but what we can do is make aging as gracefully as we can. And you guys are doing that. So I applaud all of you, and thank you guys for what you do. And thanks to Jeff and to David for putting this together. Guys, do we have a couple minutes left, or okay, we're done. I saw the hook's coming out. We're going to take a break. So thank you guys for your time. Appreciate it.